Happy enough to make a start, guys. It's lovely to be with you this afternoon, and I'll just introduce myself. My name is Michael Bryan, the Outreach Officer at the Northern Ireland War Memorial Museum, and I know from what Anna's been telling me, you've been able to explore a few local museums here in Northern Ireland, which has been great. I was just saying to her that we are slightly under the radar. That's no pun intended from a Second World War museum. But just to tell you a bit about ourselves, so I work for the Northern Ireland War Memorial, and we're a Second World War museum, and we tell the story of the home front in Northern Ireland during the Second World War. And during the session, what I'm going to do, if you're happy enough, is share with you some objects and photographs from our collection. I'm just sorry you're not able to be here in person, because I know it's always it's never quite the same on Zoom, being able to actually explore a museum or a location in person, but maybe sometime in the future you'll be able to come down and visit, and I'll give you all a tour. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some photographs and objects relating to some of the different topics that we cover in the museum. So air raid precautions, the Belfast Blitz, which is a big part of the story that we tell here in the museum, the American presence, rationing, different things like that. So hopefully you'll find it interesting and enjoyable. And I just say to you at the start as well, this is a very informal session. I'm by no means setting myself up as the kind of definitive, authoritative expert on the Second World War in Northern Ireland. I can certainly, if you ask me questions, I can do my best to answer those. But I'd love to hear any comments or any observations that you have as well. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. And we might at the end, if you want to, I'd said to Emma, I know this is an arts group, so you might want to do a bit of drawing at the end. I've got some objects. You might want to do a little bit of still life drawing if you wanted to at the end. And I think, Emma, did you send through some of the coloring I sent through as well? Yeah. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, and yes, I'd sent those out to the participants as well, so they could do that in their own time.
And that's another option as well. So what I'm going to do is, because I'm conscious it's just past 2 o'clock, and I don't know about you, but this is kind of, I suppose it's called the graveyard slot for a reason. But I always like to sort of throw in a few mystery objects just to get the brain cells working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a presentation, and I've got some mystery objects throughout this presentation just to kind of get the brain cells working. So hopefully you'll find these interesting. So I wonder if you can all see this, and feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to sort of talk about what you can see. This is our first mystery object, okay? It's actually on its side, and it was used during the Second World War. And I've actually got as well, I'll stop showing this just for a moment, just so you can see this. I've actually got one right in person. So you can see here, I'm just going to stand up. So you can see it's got a visor, okay, or this sort of panel at the front. And then there's a sort of bit at the bottom, which is a bit looser. And then there's a sort of plastic part at the side as well. Do any of you want to guess what you think this might be? There's no wrong answers, okay? Well, there is an answer, but I'm not going to judge you if you give me a completely wrong answer, just don't worry about that. Any ideas what you think this might be? And I'll show you the photograph again as well, just to give you a sort of another angle of it.
So is it a gas mask?
I am very impressed, Helen.
Oh,
did you...
Well, I've given no real thought to what a gas mask actually looked like.
What gave it away? Was it just the shape of it, or just how it looked? Or...
Well, actually, I thought, oh, that's a gas mask, and then you showed the real, in real life, and I thought, oh, that's a bit big. But you still see these things in films and that, don't you? But you don't really think about what it looks like on its own. So
yeah, do you know who it would have been used for? Because it was used for a very specific person, and the size. You mentioned the size. The size is important. Any ideas? Anna, Richard, any ideas yourselves?
I would have said for a very large man, but Richard says for a baby. So.
Richard, exactly right. Very good. Yeah, you got it in one. So it is for a baby, because the whole baby would have gone inside. So as I say, this one's on its side. The bit at the top, any ideas what that would have been used for? if you think of a gas mask or the shape of it, it's actually, it's an oxygen pump.
Yeah.
To pump in oxygen. So the idea was that the baby would have gone right up inside, and then the apron bit at the bottom would have been tied around the baby's legs. And I've got this wonderful photograph which shows you how it would have been used. I don't know how you would have felt about it. I don't think babies would have particularly enjoyed going in something like that. Although there are stories about babies falling asleep in them, and especially if mothers, you know, or nurses in this case, they might have put a bit of padding in or a cushion or something to make it a bit more comfortable. But yeah, it would have been used for a baby. Actually, the talk of, you know, young toddlers going into it as well, and you can see the nurses are wearing the gas masks as well. This is a gas mask for an older child, and it was named after a famous cartoon character, a famous Disney cartoon character. By looking at it, any ideas who it was named after? Any guesses? And it's an alliterative name, not that that necessarily gives it away, because there's probably only two that you can think of.
Donald Duck.
No, you zigged rather than zagged there, Helen. Close. The other, who's the most famous Disney cartoon character?
Mickey Mouse.
Mickey Mouse, yeah. It's called the Mickey Mouse gas mask. The reason why is because of the eyes. They were sort of like meant to look like Mickey Mouse's eyes, and also they had little ears that came out as well. So they were designed, a lot of them, certainly in the early stages of the war, had this looked red or blue. They were quite colorful. They were designed to be child friendly, really. And the idea was that because it was quite scary for young children having to put on a gas mask, this was a kind of child friendly approach to gas masks. Any ideas if there were any gas attacks during the war in the UK? What do you think?
Yes.
You know what? They never actually were. So even though every man, woman, child, baby was given their own gas mask, they were never actually needed either, which was probably just as well, because it has been shown, certainly in the case of the baby's gas mask, they wouldn't have been necessarily much use, but a lot of it was about sort of, you know, increasing people's morale and helping people to feel safe in the event of a German gas attack. You were meant to have your gas mask with you all the time. So if you're going to school, if you're going to work, if you're, you know, out in the street playing with your friends, or, you know, going to the shops or wherever. But there are stories, certainly in Northern Ireland, the further you got away from the cities, and certainly the longer the war went on, the more people began to realize actually there's not much likelihood of a gas attack, so people started leaving them at home, and there was a lot of complacency began to creep in. So that's our first mystery object relating to gas masks. I know from what Anna told me that some of you have a nursing background, or some members of the group have a nursing medical background. So I just thought I'd share with you some images relating to nurses during the war. This is actually from a collection we have in our wider collection, the photography collection. It was taken by an officer called Lieutenant James Bainbridge, and his wife is actually the second one on the left, the lady in the white apron. She was called Sylvia Bainbridge, and she was a Red Cross nurse. And you can see these nurses are being lined up for duty in Belfast during the war. FAP, any ideas what that stands for? Any guesses? First aid post, that's what it stands for. I actually have here as well, just to bring a little bit of costume into it. This is a medic's helmet, and you probably know as well, it was probably more famous. Certain people used to wear these helmets with a W on them, and you know what the W stands for? What does the word? Warden. Air raid warden.
We're not very good.
No, not at all. Not at all. Listen, it's great. You know, because I know different groups have different amounts of knowledge. So air raid wardens would have been you know, men and women who volunteered to help, particularly during air raids. They also, actually, air raid wardens would have had one of these. This is another mystery object, actually. I will stop sharing the screen and show it to you. Now, you can see this is made out of wood, okay? And it's got a handle. And it would have been used by an air raid warden, and it's connected with something we were just talking about. Any ideas what it might have been used for?
Is it one of those things that's noisy if you spin it around?
It is noisy, yeah, exactly right. And Rich is saying hand rattle siren. It's actually a gas, it's called a gas rattle. So this would have been used to sound the alert during a gas attack. And actually, when I show this to older people, a lot of them will say football matches as well. Spectators at football matches used to sound these. So again, if anyone's feeling a bit sleepy, I'm going to sound this. I hope that's okay. All right, it is quite loud, so just bear that in mind. So that would have been sounded by the air raid warden. If there had been a gas attack, that would have been used to sound the alert, to get everybody to put on their gas masks and take cover. And they had a different sound, which was a handbell, to sound the all clear whenever the gas attack was over. Thankfully, as I say, there were never any gas attacks, so it never actually had to be used. But it's, again, it's a kind of interesting object from the period. But as I say, nurses also did a really important job, particularly during the Belfast Blitz. And I'm going to bring us on to the Belfast Blitz now. This is, well, I've got a couple, I'll talk about the object on the left in a minute, but this is a book that we published in 2016 about a lady called Emma Duffin. I don't know if any of you have ever heard that name before? No? Okay. So Emma Duffin was a nurse with the voluntary aid detachment, which were basically civilian nurses. She was born in Belfast in the 1880s. From quite a well-to-do middle-class family, and she actually served as a voluntary aid detachment nurse in the First World War, in Egypt and also in France as well. And during the Belfast Blitz, she re-enlisted with the voluntary aid detachment. She was actually a commandant of a military hospital at Stranmillis College, as it is now. And what's really interesting is she kept journals during both the First World War and then during the Second World War as well. And she wrote about her experiences in the Belfast Blitz. She actually talked about how horrific it was in some ways compared with what she'd gone through in the First World War. So, for example, you might know that St. George's Market was used as a temporary morgue during the Belfast Blitz because of the amount of bodies that were being brought to hospitals. They couldn't cope with the amount of the dead. So St. George's Market was used for 250 people to be laid out. And she describes just the horror of that, basically, and people had to come down and try to identify their loved ones. So it was a terrible situation to be in. And she writes in her diary as well about traveling through North Belfast, walking up the Crumlin Road, up to the Old Park Road, and seeing the devastation that had been inflicted on Belfast. So I just thought, particularly because of some of your backgrounds, you might be interested in her story. And that's just one example of somebody who was a nurse who played a really significant role in the Belfast Blitz, and whose journals are a really important first-hand account of what happened. The Belfast Blitz itself, just to explain a bit more about it, it was 4 air raids in April and May 1941. And the reason Belfast was attacked was really because of our war effort. So in terms of the amount of factories that were in the city, the shipbuilding, Short and Harland were making aircraft as well. They were making uniforms and parachutes and camouflage nets in factories. So the Germans were aware of that. And that's the reason why Belfast was a target. But unfortunately, the authorities in Belfast were very complacent. So there were very few public air raid shelters. Only 1/4 of the population of the city had public air raid shelters to be able to go to. We only had 22 anti-aircraft guns in 1941, or in April 1941. Liverpool had over 100. And very few people had been evacuated as well. So it meant that whenever the Germans came to attack the city, it was a very devastating event. The object on the left, I'm going to, again, you can see the photograph of it, but I'm going to show you it just because I have it here beside me. Do you want to guess what this might be in terms of, and it's connected with the Belfast Blitz. So you can see it's a metal tube, and that's the front of it. And then you can see it has a tail as well. Any ideas what you think it might be?
Telescope?
No, good guess, Helen. Good guess, because it does. It's the right shape. It's the right shape. But if you think in terms of, yeah, Richard, well, it's a bomb. It's actually a bomb. It's not, don't worry, it's diffused. Okay, it's not. You won't have to watch it explode here on the other side of the screen. It's actually called an incendiary bomb or a fire bomb. And what this had in it was a chemical that when it was dropped by the Germans, the chemical would ignite. And the heat that this bomb, just this little tube generated, was so strong that it could actually melt through metal. And in terms of the 4 air raids on Belfast in the Belfast Blitz, there were 2 major raids. The second major raid was called the Fire Raid. It was on the 4th, 5th of May, 1941. The reason it was called the Fire Raid is because 96,000 of these bombs were dropped on Belfast, 96,000 of them. And they caused a huge amount of devastation. So one hit the roof of Belfast City Hall and destroyed the banqueting hall, which is on the side of the City Hall beside the Titanic Memorial. It's lucky the whole building wasn't destroyed. A lot of Harland and Wolff, the workshops there, about 3/4 of them were destroyed or damaged. And about 200 buildings around the city centre were set on fire. So it's why, as part of the air raid precautions, they had what were called fire watchers, so people standing on the roofs of buildings and housing, trying to be ready to put out these bombs whenever they fell in case they caught fire. The other major raid, which was the one that was slightly earlier, was on the 15th, 16th of April, 1941. And it was Easter Tuesday, 1941. It was a day like today when it was a public holiday. People had gone to the seaside for the day. People were up at Bellevue at the Floral Hall, which was a big dance hall at the time. So there was a dance there that night. There was a Ceilidh in the Ulster Hall. So people were generally having a nice day off. And then at 20 to 11 at night, there was a sounded over the city. And I'm just going to sound something now, which hopefully you will be able to hear, and you might have an idea of what I'm going to play now. So this was the sound that sounded over Belfast at 10 to 11 that night. You hear that? So it's the sound of the air raid siren, as you probably know. And a force of about 200 German bombers arrived over Belfast and started dropping their bombs. Now, it was very poor visibility that night. So a lot of the bombs didn't actually hit their targets. And a lot of the bombs actually fell in North Belfast and West Belfast, heavily residential areas. If you think of what Belfast was like at the time, very densely working class housing. A lot of people were living quite close to factories where they were living. And what happened was these bombs just devastated these areas. And in the course of that night, about 750 people were killed. And there were some terrible events, like one of the very few public air raid shelters in Percy Street off the Shankill Road. There were about 40 people in it, and it took a direct hit, and everybody who was killed was in the air raid shelter. They often had concrete roofs and brick walls, so they weren't necessarily built that well, and the roof just came down on everybody. And yeah, I'll show you some photographs actually, which give you just an idea of what it was like in Belfast. This is what was like the following morning. So this is the Antrim Road. So I mentioned North Belfast particularly was badly hit, around the Antrim Road, the Crumlin Road, around the Old Park Road, around the Shankill as well in West Belfast. So this is the Antrim Road. It was just up the up the road from this photograph was Halliday's Road, and again there was a public air raid shelter there, took a direct hit. And there are stories of people whenever they were in the Floral Hall and they heard the air raid sirens, they all ran down to the Antrim Road. If you know that area, got on the tram, came down the Antrim Road, and many of them got off at Halliday's Road and ran into the air raid shelter and were killed. So it was a terrible thing, but this gives you an idea of just how much housing was destroyed. This is off the Old Park Road in Ballymuir Street and Ballyclare Street. And again, you can just see very tightly packed terraced housing. A lot of these terraces just came down on the occupants. And if you think back then as well, you often had extended families living together. So grandparents living with parents, children. So very sadly, there were cases of whole families were killed. You can actually see in this photograph as well on the left, you see the chimney with the smoke coming out. So again, it's a reminder of how many factories and mills were in this area, which were targets for the Germans. And we actually have in our collection, we have an original map, which is entitled Stadplan von Belfast. And it's a map of Belfast that the Luftwaffe used to bomb Belfast during the Blitz. And it has all the targets picked out. And then this is York Street Mill. So if you know where Cityside is in Belfast, used to be Yorkgate. This was a huge mill. It had a huge, you can see just the height of it. And one of the walls came down on some of the surrounding housing during the Blitz. And again, a lot of people were killed in this area. And then this is the Belfast Telegraph building, which is still there today beside the Central Library in Royal Avenue. The archway where you can see people gathered just in the center of the photograph. You can actually still see the shrapnel marks on the wall there. And there's a little plaque which mentions the fact that the Belfast Telegraph never stopped publication during the Belfast Blitz. And many of the photographs I'm showing you were actually taken by Belfast Telegraph photographers during the air raids. And then this is Bridge Street. So you can see in the distance, just on the corner, there's the Northern Wig, which was a newspaper at the time. Today it's a restaurant, and then the old bank building. And then the corner there on the right is where Iceland and the post office are now in the centre of Belfast. This was called Blitz Square during the war for obvious reasons, because particularly during the fire raid that night of the 4th, 5th of May, when all those fire bombs dropped, that's when a lot of these buildings were destroyed. And I'm sure you recognize the landmark at the end of this street. So this is High Street with the Albert Clock. And again, you can see how many of these buildings have been destroyed. And it's really noticeable today, actually, when you're walking up the street. The National's still there, obviously, but it's noticeable how many of these buildings are all post-war buildings, and that's because of the Blitz. So altogether, nearly 1,000 people were killed in the 4 air raids. Over 100,000 people were made temporarily homeless. Over half the city's housing stock was destroyed. It was a terribly dramatic or traumatic event in the city's history. And even though there were never any air raids in Belfast after May 1941, I think it's something that left a huge mark on people's lives. And it's something we do a lot, as I say, even last year for the 80th anniversary to commemorate. And we have an oral history project as well. So we collect people's memories and stories, some of them very harrowing and very moving, I have to say, of what it was like to live through those air raids. Have you any questions about that? I just want to pause, or any questions or comments about any of that? No?
No, it's just horrific. Yeah, just hearing about what happened. And
yeah, it's kind of, it's almost, a lot of people, I feel like it's maybe been overshadowed by the Troubles to some extent, because even, you know, visitors from other places don't necessarily associate the Blitz with Belfast, and yet it had such a huge impact, as I say, even in terms of how much destruction there was. Not necessarily, you know, there were other places had higher casualty rates, but I think it probably had a disproportionate impact in terms of the trauma that it had on people. Well, listen, I know that's a very heavy topic, but I'm going to move on to something a little bit lighter. I hope you've all had your lunch, by the way. I always get hungry when I look at this painting. It's not in our collection, it's in the collection of the Imperial War Museum, and it's by an artist called Leonora Green. Any idea what this would be relating to in terms of the Second World War?
Rations?
Yeah, rations. Yeah, exactly right. You can actually see there's a ration book upside down there in the bottom left. It's called Coupons Required. And the whole idea was to show a week's worth of rations for a family during the war. What sort of foods can you spot in the painting? Any ideas?
Foods.
Yeah, what sort of foods can you see?
Well, there's a steak.
Yeah, nice big juicy
Not much
steak.
of it though, for a family.
No, exactly. I think that's the idea. This painting, it's kind of bringing home just how limited rations were. What do you think's in the big silver pot?
Tea.
Yeah. So in terms of your week's worth of rations, you were allowed 2 ounces of tea, which is, I don't know if any of you like tea. I would go mad if I didn't get like 3 or 4 cups of tea a day. But it's very, very little, really. It's about 50 grams actually of tea. They were going to reduce it even further, but Churchill, who was the prime minister at the time, supposedly said tea is more important than bullets, because you know how it is. If you're having a bad day or you need a bit of a pick-me-up, a cup of tea, you know, makes such a difference. I know it does for me anyway. Whatever foods can you see there?
Would there be bread? Would there be bread? Sorry, I was just going to say, is there bread somewhere?
Yeah, oh look, bread was eventually rationed, but no, there's no bread in the picture. But yeah, you're right to point that out.
So there's lots of butter and mustard.
Yeah, lots of. Well, again, you're only allowed 2 ounces of butter for a week. Right. So again, 50 grams of butter for a whole week for one person anyway. Very, very little. You can probably see the cheese there on the right. So you're allowed 3 ounces of cheese for a week. Again, you know, very, very little. The sugar, you'll recognize Tate and Lyle. You were allowed 8 ounces of sugar, which again was, you know, a little bit more than what you got with other rations, but not necessarily a huge amount. Just to talk a bit more specifically about certain foods. I don't know if have any of you ever heard of this? Dried eggs, okay. So I'm gonna stop sharing the camera. I've actually got this here. So this is the tin here. So dried eggs was a big thing during the war. It's basically eggs with the water taken out. So as part of your week's worth of rations, you were allowed an egg a week. But if you wanted to perhaps get more egg rather than shelled egg, you can actually get 12 eggs in a tin of dried eggs, which would last you a month. But I'm going to show you what dried eggs looks like. So as I say, it's eggs with the water taken out. This is what dried eggs looks like, okay? It doesn't look very appetizing, does it? No. If you could smell it, it doesn't smell very nice either. But it was regarded as being more economical during the war, and particularly if you think about it, you know, a lot of food was being brought in by America by convoy ships, and a lot of those ships were being sunk by German U-boats. So it was a real kind of challenge to be able to get enough food into the country, which is one of the reasons why they were bringing in, where they brought in rationing. They brought it in January 1940. But they also needed to keep bringing in food through convoys. So you could pack a lot of these tins of dried eggs into those convoy ships. So it was a more productive way of getting food. I've met a lot of older people who remember dried eggs, and bear in mind, rationing lasted until 1954. So even people who lived after the war remember rationing and dried eggs. Some people really love the taste of it, especially if you made it into an omelette or a cake or something like that to maybe disguise the taste a bit. But I have met people as well who hated the taste of dried eggs and do not miss it at all. But you can still get it today, which is how I managed to get some. I've also got, and this is perhaps the saddest aspect of all of this, this is your week's worth of sweets, okay? This is 2 ounces of sweets. And this is about 8 jelly babies. And one of the things we do in the museum is we get lots of primary school children visiting because they're studying the Second World War in the curriculum. And we tell them about rationing, and then we tell them about sweets. And as I mentioned, you only allowed 8 ounces of sugar for a week during the war. So there was fewer sugar. It's just per person, Richard. Yeah, it's a sweet allowance per person. But if you think about it, when I say to kids, this is your 8 ounces, or this is your 2 ounces of sweets, 8 sweets, that's basically 1 sweet every day, and then maybe an extra one that you might give to your teacher, and then they all go, no, definitely not. But we always ask them the question, do you think people were healthier during the war or do you think people are healthier now in terms of their diets? What do you think yourselves?
Well, that's
say healthier now.
Healthier now, but there are lots of there's lots of problems as well with diet today, isn't there? So I presume there's a lot of people malnourished and underweight.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that's true to say is the diet, certainly compared to what had been before, people had much more balanced diets. And I'll talk about another thing that they were able to do in terms of getting more food, but I think dentists in particular had a hard time during the war because you were eating far less sugar, so there was far less tooth decay. So, you know, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing that you were only getting a few ounces of food per week during the war. Another way you could get food, of course, was through these schemes. Have you all heard the Dig for Victory scheme? Dig for Victory. So it was a government scheme, again, to encourage people to get more food, really by growing their own vegetables. So if people had their own gardens, or I suppose allotments as well were a big thing as well during the war. So people were encouraged to dig their own vegetables, and certainly public spaces as well were often given over to grow vegetables. So Queen's University, actually the lawns of Queen's University were used to dig up or to plant vegetables. Also at Stormont as well, the grounds of Parliament buildings were dug up to grow vegetables. What sort of vegetables can you see on the left there, if you can look in the basket?
Carrots, onions, cauliflower, cabbage, tomato,
yeah.
Lots.
What do we eat a lot of in Ireland?
Potatoes,
yes. So the government came up with a slogan which went potatoes new, potatoes old, potatoes in a salad cold, potatoes baked, mashed or fried, potatoes whole, potatoes pied. Enjoy them all, including chips. Remember, spuds don't come in ships. So that was to encourage people to grow their own vegetables. You mentioned, there's a couple more posters actually. There's a nice one on the left, on the right there, which says better potluck with Churchill today than humble pie under Hitler tomorrow. And you can see the caricatures of Churchill and Hitler. So just encouraging people, don't waste food, grow your own vegetables as well. And there's these nice cartoon characters. Potato Pete, who was to encourage people to grow potatoes, and also Dr. Carrot. What are carrots meant to help you do?
See in the dark.
Yeah, exactly right. So you can see on the right there, part of what was happening as part of the air raid precautions was the blackout. So people were told they had to put up blackout curtains during the war, and they switched off street lighting as well. And it was all to try to stop the Germans being able to bomb cities successfully and find their targets. But people were also told, as in this poster on the right, to eat carrots so that they could see in the blackout. And there was an RAF pilot called Cunningham who was also said to eat lots of carrots. He was called Cat's Eyes Cunningham because he was a fighter ace. He shot down so many German planes. So the government said he had lots of carrots. That's why he had such great eyesight. Do you think that's true? It's a load of nonsense. So it certainly doesn't hurt your eyesight to eat carrots, but I don't think there's much medical evidence that actually it makes a huge amount of difference, to be honest with you. And actually, the funny thing about Dr. Carrot, who's encouraging children to eat carrots and, you know, have better eyesight, is he's wearing glasses. Slightly ironic. I'm not sure they thought that through whenever they developed him as a character. Also, a big thing in Northern Ireland during the war, smuggling. Lots of stories about smuggling because, of course, we had the land border with the south, and although there was some rationing in the south as well, lots of foods you could get from the south to the north. So there are stories of ladies in Belfast getting on the train, being very slim, and then when they're coming back from Dublin that night, suddenly they become pregnant or very. They'd certainly put on a lot of weight, and it's because of all the food they were smuggling with them. There's a story as well about a lady who was coming back on the train from Belfast, quite a posh lady, and she was stopped on the train by one of the customs officials who said, "Excuse me, madam, by reason to believe that you are smuggling food." And she said, "How dare you accuse me of that? I've never been so insulted in my life." And he said, "Well, I'm sorry, madam, you're going to have to see my manager when we get into the station in Belfast." So the train came into the station and he brought her to a waiting room in the station and went off to get his manager. And he sat her down and went off, and he took ages about it. And what the other thing about the waiting room was there was a big fireplace with a fire going. And of course, what she had was she had all this butter strapped to her and it melted all down her. And they knew exactly what they were about. So there were lots of stories of this kind of cat and mouse between people smuggling and the officials trying to catch them out across the border. So there was a lot of that as well. This is a nice photograph actually of Joseph Street. Lots of recycling as well during the war. So people encouraged to recycle scrap metal, for instance, collect scrap metal. So this is Joseph Street off the Shankill, and people are gathering scrap metal. Yeah, I think this photograph in some ways represents the sort of community spirit that there was during the war. Again, a slogan that they had was, "The war is driving Hitler back. So here's one way to win it. Just give your salvage man sack and see there's plenty in it." So they came up with lots of these kind of slogans to encourage people to take part in these campaigns during the war. Of course, food wasn't just rationed, clothing as well. Clothing was rationed from June 1941 because cloth was important for uniforms and parachute nets and as part of the wider war effort. So this is actually a clothing book. Originally, you were only allowed 66 coupons, and then eventually that came down to about 34 coupons. And if you think about it, I think a man's coat cost about 16 coupons, and that was for, you got 66 coupons, say, for example, for a whole year. So you could go very quickly for your coupon allowance if you weren't careful. And as I say, it had to last the whole year. I got another, again, this is a government campaign, Make, Do and Mend, to encourage people to recycle and to mend their clothes. Another mystery object for you. So this is a photograph of it on its side, and I'll just hold it up to the camera. This is connected with Make, Do and Mend. This is you'll be glad to know this is our last mystery object, okay? But any ideas what you think that might be?
I don't have a clue.
So you can see, well, you see what it's made out of?
Wood?
Yeah, it's made out of wood. And it's got this sort of circular shape. When I first saw this, I thought it was like a spinning top, like a toy. It's called a darning mushroom. And a lot of older people would remember it because if you had, say, for example, a hole in your socks, you would have put this up inside the socks, held it against the hole, and then you would have darned it. So you would have patched it up. So this again would have been something that would have been very popular.
Very handy. Very handy.
Well, it's the kind of thing, I mean, I wouldn't have a clue how to sew, quite honestly, or darn, but it's one of those skills, I suppose, that especially during the war, if you were being told to make, do and mend, and you didn't necessarily, you know, if we got a hole in our socks today, we'd just throw them away and get a new pair. But of course, you know, people were being told to make, do and mend, so they had to do that. So just to finish off, I'm just going to talk about this gentleman and where he's from. Sorry, Richard, I missed your message there. Yeah, you like how it's a functional object, but it's well made and designed. Do you know what? I get a lot of these off the likes of Etsy. It's amazing how many of these you can still pick up, but they are really well made. I think you're right. There's a kind of there's an elegance to it actually. There's a quality to it that you wouldn't necessarily get in similar products today. Yeah, get on Etsy. Believe me, I've spent fortunes on Etsy. I'm glad I have a budget. Any ideas? This man is not from Northern Ireland, but any ideas where he is from? He's from another country and came to Northern Ireland during the war.
America? Yeah,
he's from America. You can tell, I don't know if you agree, but he has a great set of teeth. Doesn't he have a great set of American teeth? His name was Milburn Hinkey. And he is officially the first American serviceman, not just to arrive in Northern Ireland, but in Europe. because this was actually the first place where American forces arrived in Europe for the Second World War. I don't know if you knew that. And he arrived in Belfast with this first group of Americans on the 26th of January 1942. So just a couple of weeks ago, that was the 80th anniversary of the Americans' arrival in Northern Ireland. Really nice story. He was stepping off the gangplank at the Duffin Quay in Belfast, and actually in the background you can see. Have you heard of William Connor? I don't know if you've come across any of his work before. A lot of his work's in the Ulster Museum. He was a local artist. This photograph was taken in William Connor's studio, which is now a cafe. It's across the road on the Stranmillis Road from the Ulster Museum, excuse me. And he was, as I say, he was a war artist. So this is a drawing in the background that he did of that event. And Milburn Henke is in it. He's saluting as he's coming off the gangplank. But they were welcomed by the Duke of Abercorn, who was the governor of Northern Ireland, and John Miller Andrews, who was the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland at the time, elder brother of Thomas Andrews, the designer of the Titanic, actually. And in the background was the band of the Royal Ulster Rifles playing Star Spangled Banner. But Milburn Henke was 23 years old. He was from a town called Hutchinson, Minnesota. And you can maybe tell from his surname, which is spelled Henke. He was of German heritage. So it was kind of a nice backstory that he was coming to fight the Germans. And he was also regarded as very handsome. Maybe you agree. He's not a bad looking guy, is he? And he got a lot of attention from local girls, and he got a lot of fan mail letters, shall we say, about 300 fan mail letters. He said later on, with all the attention I got, it was almost like the army expected me to win the war single-handedly. And he did. He eventually survived the war, came back to Belfast in 1994 for some of the commemorations, and died in 1998. But he was, as I say, one of these first wave of young Americans, and they were all given this, which is called the Pocket Guide to Northern Ireland. And this was to explain to, most of these young Americans had never been out of the States before. And it was to explain to them what life was like in Northern Ireland and what the people were like. So, for example, they were told the sun is an occasional visitor to Ireland, which we will agree. They were told as well that you will drink more tea in Ireland in a week than you have ever drank in your life before. That's true, isn't it? They were also told Irish girls are friendly. They will stop on the country road with you and pass the time of day with you, but don't think on that account that they're falling for you in a big way, okay? So don't get too big-headed about these flirtatious Irish girls. They were told, watch out for poaching. It's a moonshine whiskey. It's dynamite. And they were told, don't argue religion or politics, which is probably still good advice today. So the few stereotypes in there, a few cliches, but I think there's a lot of truth there as well. And actually you can get a copy of this on our website, and it's a really interesting read just to kind of get a perception of what they must have made of people in Northern Ireland when they arrived. So there's some tanks from the 1st Armoured Division, which was one of the divisions. It was based in Southdown around Newcastle and the Mournes when they first arrived. And this is a nice item in a collection because I think it's generally fair to say the Americans, they got on really well with local people. They were very generous. They did a lot of charity events for local people, including this. So this is actually a charity baseball match. And you can see it was played in front of the Duke and Duchess of Abercorn, the governor of Northern Ireland, and his wife. And it's played between the New York Lions and the Californian Eagles at Ravenhill, July 1942. And at the bottom, you can maybe just about make out, it says, all proceeds go to the Belfast Hospital for Sick Children and the Ulster Hospital for Children and Women. But what's nice about this is on the other side, you can see it says the game of baseball described by an Ulsterman. So this was to explain to local people who had not a clue probably what baseball was, had never really seen it before. This is to explain to them, this is what you're watching in this baseball game. So that's a nice item in our collection. And as I say, all the money from that went to local hospitals. And then this is another gift, again in our collection, that was given by an American to his girlfriend. This is actually a bar of soap. Soap was rationed during the war, along with clothing and food. So this would have been very much appreciated by a local lady. And other things.
I would have got that one right. Sorry.
Oh, would you have got that, Helen?
I would have got that one right.
Oh, sorry, I didn't want to torture you anymore with mystery objects. So I've heard people have said this is a domino as well. It does look
like that as well.
They brought with them all kinds of things. Again, I'll just stop sharing. This is just a replica, but can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the main brand of American cigarettes during the war, Lucky Strike. Nylon stockings as well, very popular with the ladies. Chewing gum. So the slogan amongst kids at the time was "Got any gum, chum?" And there are stories about the Americans being tortured walking down the street. And any time an American spat chewing gum out and the children were following, what do you think they did?
Picked it up.
Straight up into the mouth. Didn't care whether it had been chewed or not, didn't care at all. And Coca-Cola as well. I've met people whose first taste of Coca-Cola was from the Americans. They gave rides in their Jeeps to local children. They threw Christmas parties. They took children to the cinema as well. They gave them sweets. So they were very fondly remembered. And I mentioned the local ladies. There were lots of dances, lots of entertainments for the Americans put on. This is a dance at St. Patrick's Day, or at Carrickfergus St. Patrick's Day, 1942. You can see the nice poster for the gas attack there on the board, just explaining to people what to do and put on their gas masks. And I'll just finish with this photograph, which sort of sums up, I suppose, the relationship between the Americans and local people. So this is a wedding photograph. And it's taken in April 1944. The man is called Sergeant Merrill Hamilton. I think that's a really American sounding name, Merrill Hamilton, a very glamorous name, from Vermont. And he was based at Ballyedmund Castle in Rostrevor, or near Rostrevor, in Carlingford Lough. And his wife, Patricia Rooney, she was a farmer's daughter from Mayo Bridge in County Down. And they met at a dance in Warrenpoint, and they were married in Warrenpoint. This is their wedding day. What do you notice about Patricia, the way she's dressed?
Not like a wedding dress.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Rationing.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So brides couldn't get material, nice white lace, generally speaking. So she's wearing her best dress. So that's why. And she might have worn a little ornament or something to try to, set it off as a bride. But generally speaking, you couldn't get white lace wedding dresses. So Merrill survived the war and then went off to take part in the Allied advance in Europe. And then he went back to the United States and Patricia joined him. And altogether about 1,800 local women married American GIs. And one of the nice things for me in the museum is I meet lots of American visitors, many of whom are the children or the grandchildren of GIs who married local women, which is really nice. And altogether about 300,000 Americans married local women, or sorry, 300, that would be a lot of women. 300,000 Americans came to Northern Ireland during the war. So they trained here. At one point, something like 1 in 10 of people in Northern Ireland were actually American servicemen. So you would have been very hard pressed not to find an American here at one point. I'm going to finish there.